Hey guys, what's up? Cruiserl here. In this video, I'm gonna give you guys a tour, so to speak, through my Visual Studio setup, show you some extensions that I'm using, keyboard shortcuts, color themes, in hopes that you might find something useful that can improve your own productivity. Let's go back to the very basics. We'll start by installing a fresh copy of Visual Studio. When you run the Unity installer, it also gives you an option to install Visual Studio, but I usually don't pick this option. I prefer to install it myself and download it separately from Visual Studio's own site. The version that we want is Visual Studio Community 2017. The Community Edition is 100% free, but it still has all the features that you could ever want. To be honest, I'm not even sure what the other editions have that this one doesn't, but I'm fairly sure it's only minor stuff. Visual Studio 2017, as opposed to 2015 and previous versions, has a much better installer that is very modular. It allows you to choose and install only what you really need, which allows you to have an install size of only around 1 GB if you're using it for Unity development, as opposed to a mandatory at least 10 GB of install size in previous versions. Since we want to use this for Unity development, we just need to check the game development with Unity checkbox, as you can see on screen, and we can also uncheck the optional checkbox that installs Unity Editor, because we probably want to install that separately. If you want to use the new Unity scripting runtime version, equivalent to .NET 4.6, we need to navigate to the Individual Components tab up here, and then select the .NET Framework 4.6 Targeting Pack. If you also want to use Visual Studio for other things, you can select the other components as needed. Even after the installation finishes, you can always run the Visual Studio installer again later to add or remove components. When the installation finishes, we can start configuring Visual Studio. The very first thing that I'm going to do is change the color theme to dark. Next up, let's download and install some extensions. We need to go into the Tools menu and choose Extensions and Updates, and then click the Online category. Now we can start searching for and downloading the extensions that we want. Here is a list of the extensions that I use. Select Next Occurrence, Color Theme Editor, Enhanced Syntax Highlighting, Line Endings Unifier, SubWord Navigation, and Fix Mixed Tabs. After downloading the extensions, we need to close Visual Studio. The installation of the selected extensions will begin, and when it's done, we can start configuring them. You can see right away that we have some colors that we don't usually have, and that's due to the Enhanced Syntax Highlighting extension. This gives us the ability to have different colors for some things that Visual Studio usually doesn't allow us to, like having methods in a different color, local variables in a different color from class variables, and other things like that. To configure our extensions and other options, we need to click Tools, and then open the Options window, and here we can configure pretty much anything related to Visual Studio and our extensions. I like to start with the easy ones, so let's close this, and come down here to Line Endings Unifier. The reason why I use this extension is because in Unity, when you create a new C# script, it comes with Linux line endings by default. But when you start editing it in Visual Studio, which uses Windows line endings by default, Unity starts complaining that you have a file that has mixed line endings. And that gets pretty annoying, so I use this to automatically convert the line endings to be all of the same type. So let me just backtrack and explain this in case some of you guys don't know about the line endings issue. So in any program that you use to write text, the program needs to know where a line ends and the next one begins. And to do that, it uses a special character, an invisible character, to determine that. However, in different operating systems, the symbol that is used is different. And that's why, for example, if you write a text file on a Mac and you open it in Notepad in Windows, you will see all of the text in the same line. It's because Notepad doesn't detect the line ending symbol from a Mac computer. Usually most programs are smart enough to detect both symbols, but it can still cause some issues to have mixed line endings. So it's best if you have the same line endings throughout. The only thing we need to do here to guarantee that all line endings are converted is activate the option that says force line ending on document save. We want to come here and set it to true. The default line ending that you are going to use depends on you. I usually choose the option that corresponds to the operating system that I'm currently in, but sometimes if you're working together with users on a different operating system, you might want to change this. After that, let's select the text editor section, open that up. These aren't options for any extension, these are just Visual Studio options, but I like to come down here and under all languages and tabs, I like to make sure that keep tabs is selected. And under the C# language, again tabs, I like to make sure that smart indenting is activated too. Now I want to configure some keyboard shortcuts, so we need to open up Environment and then select Keyboard, and we need to search in this little input field here the command that we want to change. Let's start out with the Select Next Occurrence extension. I like to set these to the shortcuts that are recommended in the extension's homepage. I'm just going to show a screenshot of that. If I'm not mistaken, these shortcuts are recommended to replicate the behavior found in other editors like Sublime Text and VS Code. But there's two small details here. The first one is that Select All Occurrences doesn't have a recommended shortcut, so I decided to use Ctrl-Shift-D. The second is that the shortcut recommended for Skip Occurrence is already in use by default to format the whole document, and I actually do use that shortcut from time to time, so I decided to use Ctrl-Alt-D instead. When editing these shortcuts, we should also choose the text editor option in this drop-down right here, under the label that says Use New Shortcut In. So the Select Next Occurrence extension, as the name implies, allows you to select multiple occurrences of the same word. So if I put my mouse cursor over the inventory variable here, and I start pressing Ctrl-D, it will start selecting all occurrences of the inventory word throughout this file, and I can use this to edit all of them at the same time and do other advanced stuff. I also want to configure the keyboard shortcuts for the SubWord navigation extension. For these I like to use Alt plus the corresponding arrow key, so SubWord Next would be Alt and the right arrow key. Next Extend would be Alt Shift and the right arrow key. Previous, Alt Left, and Previous Extend, Alt Shift Left. For Delete Next, we'll set it to Alt Delete, and Delete Previous, Alt Backspace. And I haven't even explained why the SubWord extension is useful, so let me once again backtrack a little bit here and explain the default behavior. So if you use the left and right arrow keys, as it's probably obvious, it allows you to jump from one character to the next. But if you hold down Ctrl while you use the right and left arrow keys, it allows you to jump from a whole word to the next word. So we hold down Ctrl here and we press left, we jump back to the beginning of the stat panel word. If we press right, it jumps back to the end. Right again, it jumps over the dot. Once again, it jumps over the set stats word, and so on and so forth. And what the SubWord navigation extension does, which we've configured to be in the Alt key instead of the Control key, it allows you to jump between subwords in a single word. So the setStats method is composed of two words, and by pressing Alt and then left, it allows me to jump to the end of the set word, and again allows me to jump to the beginning, and so on. So let's take this time to also configure some default Visual Studio keyboard shortcuts too. So Visual Studio has a pretty useful feature, similar to Sublime Text and VS Code, where you can just search for the name of a file or a variable or even a method, and it will just take you there. And this option is called Go to All. And by default it's assigned to Control Comma or Control T, but just to be consistent with those other programs like Sublime and VS Code, I want to change this to be assigned to Control P, which is by default assigned to Print. And come on, whoever needs to print their code files. I also want to change the default comment and uncomment shortcuts, because these default shortcuts are like, really? I don't want to do 2 different key presses just to comment out a line. So in, I guess, normal keyboard, you would usually assign this to Control and the / key, but since I'm using a Portuguese keyboard, I'm going to assign this to this weird thing that I don't think even has a name in English, and for the uncomment shortcut, I'm going to assign it to Control-Shift and the same key. I also like to change the shortcut that closes a tab, which is just called File Close, to be Ctrl-W, just like the shortcut that closes tabs in your browser, for example. And so, guys, the only thing that we still need to do is customize the colors of our color theme. And that's why we downloaded the Color Theme Editor extension. You can always customize colors by going into Options and then Fonts and Colors, but the extension makes this process a whole lot easier. So we need to open the Tools menu and then select Customize Colors, and this will open up a new tab with all of the themes that came included with the Color Theme Editor. And these are the default themes. We can't edit them directly, so what we need to do is press this button right here to create a copy of the theme that we want to edit. Because I like the dark theme, I'm going to create a copy of it. And I'm going to call it Dark Gris. And now we can click on the Edit Theme button. This, once again, will open up a new tab where we have access to all of the things that can be edited for a single theme. In order to view this list, we have to click this button right here that says Show All Elements. I'm going to drag this tab to the side here to make it easier for us to see our changes while we edit. And I'm also going to close these panels here, or actually I'm going to unpin them so that we have a bit more space. So I think that overall the default colors of the dark theme are already pretty good, especially when we add the enhanced syntax highlighting extension. So there's only about 3 or 4 things that I'd like to change. So the first thing is punctuation, and these are the parentheses, curly braces, and things of that nature. I like to more easily be able to tell them apart from the variables that they are around, so I usually change this to be a light blue. I'm going to copy the color here from my notes. So this is going to be a very subtle change. I'm going to hit Save and Apply. And you can see that these parentheses and commas and all of that stuff has now changed to be a lighter blue instead of white. So like I said, this is a very subtle change, but I do quite like it. Another thing I like to change are the operators, and those are the equal signs, the dots, and things of that nature. Once more, I will copy the color value here from my notes. I like to change this to be a very light orange, and this allows us to distinguish them much more clearly from their surroundings, which I very much like. And last but not least, I like to configure one of the extra colors that the enhanced syntax highlighting extension allows us to configure. And to access that, we need to search for user tags. That's how the extension chose to identify the extra tokens that it allows us to configure. And the thing I want to change is the parameters here. The default value is a little bit too dark for me. I think it removes too much importance from it. It almost feels like parameters are less important than even a comment or something, and I find that pretty weird. But I do like to be able to distinguish them from other local variables and class variables and that sort of thing. So the only thing I want to do is just drag this a bit higher so that they're not as dark. It becomes a pretty subtle difference from local variables, but I think it's good enough, because in practice they're not really that different from local variables, so I think it's fine. So this is it for this video. I hope you have enjoyed, I hope you have learned something, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers!